Chapter 1: The Midnight Alignment. The world operates under the comfortable illusion that the Second World War reached its absolute conclusion in May of 1945. We are taught to remember the flashing cameras of the international press, the formal signing of surrender documents in Berlin and Reims, and the euphoric crowds filling the avenues of London and New York. This is the clean, sanitized version of history presented in school textbooks. But in the quiet, ruined landscapes of Central Europe, amidst the smoldering craters of shattered cities, a completely different conflict was beginning at that exact moment. It was a silent, desperate war fought not with artillery, but with briefcases, files, and human currency. The prize was the intellectual capital of the collapsing Third Reich. The major powers realized that the ultimate currency of the coming century was not gold bullion, but specialized knowledge. It was the dark, uncompromised genius of men who had willingly traded their humanity for unprecedented scientific breakthroughs. While the ashes of crematoriums and bombed factories were still warm, a bureaucratic machinery was set into motion within secret military intelligence offices. A simple, mundane object, a regular, mass-produced plastic paperclip, was systematically attached to the personnel files of specific German targets. This tiny piece of office wire carried an incredible, terrifying weight. It represented absolute, state-sponsored absolution. If a German scientist's file was marked with that paperclip, his past was effectively wiped clean. His record of fanatical party membership vanished into thin air. His wartime atrocities were buried deep within classified archives. The black uniform of the SS, stained with the blood of millions, was metaphorically incinerated, replaced by a well-tailored civilian suit paid for with American government funds. The fundamental bargain behind this operation was entirely cynical, stripped of any pretense of morality or conscience. The leadership of the Western world was paralyzed by the rapidly expanding shadow of the Soviet Union. In their profound fear of a communist future, they made a calculated, pragmatic choice. They decided that the abstract moral principles of tomorrow mattered significantly less than the concrete, destructive weapons of today. When American officials looked at the elite engineers who had designed the V-2 ballistic rockets, weapons that had rained indiscriminate terror upon civilians in England, they did not see war criminals. They saw a priceless technological asset that could not be allowed to fall into Soviet hands. When they looked at the medical doctors who had performed horrific, fatal experiments on helpless concentration camp prisoners, they did not see monsters. They saw invaluable, unique data that could advance their own military research. The public narrative insists that the post-war order was built entirely by heroic, clean hands. But if you look beneath the surface of modern achievements, the truth is far more unsettling. If you examine the actual foundations of the space age, the early developments of aerospace medicine, and the structural architecture of the Central Intelligence Agency, you will find the unmistakable fingerprints of the Third Reich. The official line maintained that these men were merely passive technicians, forced to work for a totalitarian state against their will. But the historical record reveals a deeply disturbing pattern of opportunism and ambition. The paperclips were secured, the identities were quietly altered, and the deadliest minds of Europe were loaded onto ships bound for the United States. The creators of Hitler's instruments of terror were about to become the architects of the modern American century. Chapter 2: The Treasure Hunt in the Ruins. By the spring of 1945, Germany had devolved into a lawless wasteland, a chaotic grey zone where international treaties and traditional ethics no longer carried any weight. Specialized tactical units of the Western Allies, operating under deep secrecy, moved directly behind the advancing front lines. These teams were not hunting for high-ranking Nazi politicians or elusive field marshals. Their primary targets were the hidden archives, laboratories, and research facilities scattered across the German countryside. The primary objective was simple: secure the intellectual property of the Reich before it could be destroyed by retreating German forces or captured by the rapidly advancing Red Army. In the region of Thuringia, hidden deep within abandoned salt mines and fortified underground bunkers, lay literally tons of highly classified scientific documents. This was technology that had leapt ahead of the rest of the world by decades. The collection included detailed blueprints for advanced jet-propelled aircraft, sophisticated infrared night vision scopes, deadly nerve agents like Tabun and Sarin, and the complete engineering schematics for long-range ballistic missiles. The military planners in Washington realized that whichever nation controlled these documents would possess undisputed military dominance for the next 50 years. To manage this massive collection of human capital, American intelligence compiled a highly confidential document known as the Blacklist. This was an extensive directory containing the names of hundreds of elite German scientists, engineers, and technicians who were to be detained and secured at any cost. This list did not exclude individuals based on their political fanaticism. It intentionally included dedicated members of the Nazi Party, decorated officers of the SS, and individuals who were personally responsible for systemic war crimes. The intelligence officers executing Operation Paperclip were under no illusions about the character of the men they were pursuing. They possessed detailed reports of the horrors associated with these scientists' work. Yet, the overriding directive originating from the highest levels of the Pentagon was unambiguous. The acquisition of advanced technology superseded the administration of international justice. The intellectual elite of the defeated enemy were quietly moved out of Germany by the plane load. They were placed in secure, comfortable interrogation camps located within the American occupation zone, such as the famous facility code named Dustbin. Here, instead of facing rigorous judicial cross-examination regarding their complicity in mass murder, they were treated with professional courtesy. They were engaged in polite, forward-looking discussions regarding their potential future employment in the United States. They were provided with comfortable quarters, ample rations, and cigarettes. They were not viewed as defendants awaiting a tribunal. They were viewed as elite recruits being prepared for transition to the American military-industrial complex. Chapter 3: The Shadow of Middlework. Dr. Wernher von Braun is celebrated in American popular culture as the brilliant, charismatic visionary behind the Apollo space program, the engineering genius who successfully put a man on the moon. His smiling face graced the covers of national magazines, and he became a familiar, trusted figure on television screens across America during the 1950s and 60s. But long before he achieved his status as an American cultural hero, his greatest technological triumphs were achieved in the dark, suffocating depths of the Kohnstein Mountain in central Germany, inside the notorious underground factory known as Mittelwerk. Mittelwerk was a massive, subterranean production facility designed to be completely impervious to Allied bombing raids. To construct this underground fortress and assemble the revolutionary V-2 rockets, the Nazi regime utilized the forced labor of tens of thousands of concentration camp prisoners, drawn primarily from the nearby Mittelbau-Dora camp. The conditions inside these tunnels were a living nightmare. The prisoners were forced to live and work in near total darkness, breathing in toxic rock dust, sleeping on the damp earth among rats, and suffering from rampant diseases like typhus and tuberculosis. They were starved, beaten, and worked to the point of literal collapse. The historical data reveals a horrifying paradox. More human beings died from starvation, disease, and summary executions while constructing the V-2 rockets inside Mittelwerk than were actually killed by the detonations of those same rockets when they struck their targets in London and Antwerp. Over 20,000 prisoners perished in those tunnels. Wernher von Braun was not a distant, detached scientist unaware of these realities. He was a frequent visitor to the subterranean factory floors of Mittelwerk. Historical records prove that he personally traveled to nearby concentration camps, including Buchenwald, to select specific, skilled prisoners to be used as slave labor in his workshops. He walked through those dark tunnels, passed by the emaciated bodies of the dead and dying, and stood within feet of the heavy wooden cranes used to publicly hang prisoners who were accused of sabotage. When American forces captured the Mittelwerk facility in 1945, they immediately realized the immense value of the hardware and the minds behind it. They rapidly evacuated over 100 completed V-2 rockets and secured the entire core engineering team led by von Braun. The profound horrors of the Dora concentration camp were thoroughly documented by American liberators, but the incriminating evidence connecting von Braun and his inner circle to these crimes was systematically classified. The elite rocket team was shielded from the Nuremberg trials, granted special status, and quietly flown to the United States to continue their work under the protection of the American military. Chapter 4: The Alteration of Records. When President Harry S. Truman officially authorized Operation Paperclip, he did so with a very specific, explicit moral caveat. He signed a strict executive directive stating that the United States government would not recruit or grant asylum to any individual who was found to have been an active, enthusiastic participant in the Nazi Party, or who was in any way complicit in the commission of war crimes. This was a logical, necessary stance for a democratic nation that was simultaneously leading the prosecution of Nazi leadership at Nuremberg. The American public would never tolerate the importation of unrepentant fascists. However, the leadership of the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, the entity tasked with overseeing the recruitment program, viewed President Truman's moral restriction as an impossible obstacle to their mission. They recognized that the true intellectual elite of the Third Reich, the men who had advanced German science to such extraordinary heights, were almost universally integrated into the Nazi state apparatus. To achieve high-ranking positions, secure research funding, and run major state institutes, these scientists had willingly joined the National Socialist Party, entered the ranks of the SS, and swore personal oaths of loyalty to Adolf Hitler. To strictly obey Truman's directive would mean abandoning the most valuable minds of Germany, allowing them to potentially be recruited by the Soviet Union. To bypass the presidential order, American intelligence officials engaged in a massive, systemic campaign of historical forgery and document manipulation. Working in hidden offices within the Pentagon and European intelligence centers, military personnel systematically rewrote the biographies and political profiles of hundreds of German scientists. Incriminating documents detailing active participation in the SS or complicity in the exploitation of slave labor were permanently removed from official dossiers. The true records were replaced with completely fabricated assessments. In the newly manufactured files, dedicated Nazi ideologues were miraculously transformed into harmless, apolitical academics. Standard entries began to appear in the rewritten dossiers, claiming that the scientist joined the party solely for professional survival, never actively participated in political activities, or was a covert critic of the Nazi regime. Real, documented war criminals were scrubbed clean on paper, their pasts laundered by the very intelligence agency sworn to uphold the law. Through this deliberate, highly organized deception, the American military successfully misled its own commander-in-chief and the American electorate, legalizing the clandestine entry of hundreds of dedicated fascists onto American soil. Chapter 5: The Science of Human Suffering. The moral compromises of Operation Paperclip extended far beyond the field of physics and mechanical rocket engineering. The program opened the borders of the United States to a deeply disturbing group of German biological weapons experts, chemical theorists, and medical doctors. The American military establishment was intensely interested in the cutting-edge research conducted by German scientists regarding aviation medicine, specifically how the human body reacts to extreme altitudes, severe freezing temperatures, and highly toxic chemical exposures. A prominent and deeply troubling example of this recruitment is the case of Dr. Huberta Strughold. In the decades following the war, Strughold would be celebrated within the United States as the undisputed father of space medicine. He became a highly respected professor. His portrait was hung in government institutions, and prestigious scientific awards were named in his honor. But during the war, Strughold held the position of director of the Institute for Aviation Medicine in Berlin, operating at the absolute peak of the Nazi medical establishment. Under the direct authority of his institute, some of the most sadistic medical experiments in human history were conducted on prisoners at the Dachau concentration camp. Human beings were forced into freezing water for hours until they lost consciousness or died, solely to determine how long a downed German pilot could survive in the North Sea. Other prisoners were locked inside high-altitude decompression chambers, where scientists monitored the physiological effects of explosive decompression on the human brain, watching through glass windows as subjects convulsed and died from air embolisms. Prisoners were forced to drink nothing but synthesized seawater for weeks to test survival limits, causing agonizing organ failure. Strughold consistently maintained after the war that he had no personal knowledge of these atrocities and that his hands were clean. However, multiple researchers and subordinates who directly participated in and documented these fatal experiments were actively recruited alongside him and brought to the United States under Operation Paperclip. The meticulously recorded data obtained from the agony and deaths of concentration camp victims was not destroyed. Instead, it was integrated into American military databases. This data formed the foundational basis for the design of life support systems, flight suits, and safety protocols for American military pilots and the early NASA astronauts. The torment of nameless prisoners in Dachau became the silent, hidden foundation of modern aerospace safety. Chapter 6: The Gehlen Intelligence Network. The utter lack of conscience that defined Operation Paperclip was not confined to the realm of hard science. It deeply penetrated the world of espionage and national security, shaping the very foundations of modern Western intelligence. In their desperate bid to gain an advantage over the Soviet Union, American military strategists made the radical decision to absorb an entire, intact intelligence network from the defeated Third Reich. The architect of this massive transaction was Major General Reinhard Gehlen. During the war, Gehlen served as the chief of Hitler's military intelligence unit on the Eastern Front, an organization known as Fremde Heerost, or Foreign Armies East. His primary responsibility was the collection and analysis of intelligence regarding the Soviet Red Army. To extract information, Gehlen's organization utilized brutal, inhumane methods against millions of Soviet prisoners of war, leading directly to mass starvation and executions in captivity. Gehlen was a highly pragmatic, cold-blooded master spy. Recognizing early on that Germany was doomed to lose the war, he systematically copied his entire, vast intelligence archive regarding the Soviet Union onto microfilm, packed the documents into heavy steel drums, and hid them in remote locations throughout the Bavarian Alps. In May of 1945, Gehlen emerged from hiding and surrendered to American forces. He did not come as a supplicant begging for mercy. He came as a powerful business partner offering a high-stakes deal. He offered to turn over his entire archive and reactivate his extensive, deep-cover spy network inside the Soviet Union in exchange for complete immunity from prosecution, high salaries, and full funding from the United States government. The American military command accepted his terms without hesitation. This agreement resulted in the creation of what became known as the Gehlen Organization. It was a powerful, independent intelligence agency operating inside post-war Germany, staffed entirely by former officers of the Wehrmacht, the Abwehr, and notorious individuals from the SS and the Gestapo. For years, this network of unrepentant fascists was funded directly by American taxpayers, operating under the control of United States Army intelligence. When the Central Intelligence Agency was officially established in 1947, the Gehlen Organization was adopted as its primary source of intelligence regarding Eastern Europe and the Soviet bloc. The cold, ruthless methods, the analytical biases, and the personnel of Hitler's espionage apparatus were permanently woven into the DNA of the early CIA, heavily influencing the trajectory of the entire global Cold War. Chapter 7: Domestic Tranquility in the American Suburbs. By the arrival of the 1950s, the dark secrets of Operation Paperclip had been successfully integrated into the fabric of daily American life. Hundreds of German scientists, engineers, and intelligence assets, along with their extended families, had been quietly relocated to quiet, prosperous communities across the United States. The primary centers for these new arrivals were places like Huntsville, Alabama, a sleepy southern town that would soon transform into a major hub of technological innovation, as well as major military installations in Texas, Ohio, and New Mexico. To the casual observer and their new American neighbors, These individuals appeared to be exceptionally polite, highly educated, and deeply cultured European immigrants who were adapting perfectly to the American way of life. They built beautiful homes in expanding suburban neighborhoods, joined local civic organizations, attended church services on Sundays, and hosted pleasant backyard barbecues for their neighbors. Their children attended local public schools, speaking English with perfect accents, completely unaware of the dark history their parents carried. The local communities embraced these families with open arms, viewing them as brilliant drivers of scientific progress who were helping America win the technological race against godless communism. But beneath this serene, suburban facade lay a heavy, strictly enforced wall of silence. Within these households, the years between 1939 and 1945 were treated as a blank space, an unmentionable era that simply did not exist. Men who had held high ranks in the SS and who had stood side by side with the architects of the Holocaust now spent their weekends mowing green lawns and singing in church choirs. Their pasts had been effectively erased, not just on official government paper, but within the social fabric of their new homeland. The United States government provided these men with a permanent, impenetrable shield against any form of legal accountability or international justice. Whenever international war crimes investigators, journalists, or survivors of the concentration camps attempted to track down specific individuals who were known to have committed atrocities, their efforts were systematically blocked. The Federal Bureau of Investigation and various military intelligence agencies classified their locations, altered their names when necessary, and denied their presence in the country. The abstract demands of moral justice and legal accountability were repeatedly sacrificed on the altar of national security, ensuring that some of the worst criminals of the 20th century were granted a safe, highly respected, and affluent retirement. Chapter 8: The Dark Legacy of MKUltra. The disturbing influence of the recruited Nazi specialists was not confined to respectable civilian space programs or conventional military engineering. The dark, experimental philosophies born in the concentration camps of Europe found a fertile, covert home within some of the most notorious and highly classified American domestic covert operations of the Cold War era. The most profound manifestation of this ideological infection occurred within the infamous CIA program known as Project MKUltra. Launched in the early 1950s under the direction of CIA Director Allen Dulles, MKUltra was a massive, highly secretive research program designed to identify and develop chemical, biological, and psychological materials to be used in interrogation and mind control. The agency was obsessed with finding a way to completely break the human psyche, erase an individual's memory, and force subjects to confess or carry out actions against their will. To achieve this goal, MKUltra researchers subjected thousands of unwitting and non-consenting individuals, including prison inmates, mental patients, drug addicts, and military personnel, to extreme, highly dangerous experiments. These subjects were forced to ingest high doses of LSD, subjected to prolonged sensory deprivation, kept in medically induced comas for weeks, and tortured with high-voltage electroshock therapy. Historians and investigative journalists who have spent decades analyzing the fragmented records of MKUltra have uncovered a direct, chilling line of continuity between these American experiments and the human experimentation carried out in Nazi Germany. During the war, Nazi doctors at Dachau had conducted extensive research into the use of mescaline and other hallucinogenic compounds as tools for forced interrogation, seeking to systematically dismantle the willpower of prisoners. Several of the German scientists who were brought to the United States under Operation Paperclip, particularly those with expertise in chemical weapons and aviation medicine, were utilized as consultants by the Chemical Corps of the United States Army and various CIA front organizations. The vast institutional knowledge of how to treat human beings as disposable, subhuman test subjects, developed within the lawless vacuum of the totalitarian state, was quietly integrated into the covert operations of a democratic superpower. The methods of the camps did not disappear. They were simply adapted for a new, global shadow war. Chapter 9. A Triumph Stained with Secrets. On the historic night of July 21st, 1969, an estimated 600 million people across the globe sat transfixed in front of television screens, watching history unfold in real time. They watched as astronaut Neil Armstrong descended the ladder of the lunar module and made humanity's very first footprint on the surface of another world. It was universally hailed as the absolute pinnacle of American scientific achievement, a shining testament to the power of free enterprise, democracy, and human ingenuity. Inside the crowded Mission Control Center in Houston, Texas, and at the launch facilities of Cape Kennedy, the core leadership of Operation Paperclip celebrated a monumental victory. Wernher von Braun, now the highly respected director of the Marshall Space Flight Center, was embraced as a national hero. Beside him stood Dr. Kurt Debus, the first director of the Kennedy Space Center, and Arthur Rudolph, the brilliant project manager for the massive Saturn V rocket that had physically propelled the Apollo 11 spacecraft into the heavens. These men were the public faces of America's triumph, standing at the apex of global admiration. But on that night of uncritical celebration, the mainstream media and the public chose to ignore the dark history that had made this triumph possible. Virtually no one mentioned that Arthur Rudolph, during his time in Germany, had served as the ruthless operations director for the subterranean metalwork factory, where he possessed direct administrative authority over the exploitation of slave labor and had actively requested fresh shipments of concentration camp inmates to replace those who had died of exhaustion at their workstations. No one mentioned that Dr. Kurt Debus, while working as a prominent rocket engineer in Germany, had worn an SS uniform and had personally denounced his own scientific colleagues to the Gestapo for expressing doubts about Germany's ultimate victory. The monumental achievement of putting a man on the moon was real, and it transformed the course of human history. But that achievement was purchased through a profound, systemic moral compromise. The majestic rocket that carried the hopes of humanity into the cosmos was designed, engineered, and brought into reality by men who, just 25 years earlier, had dedicated their extraordinary minds to serving a genocidal regime. The path to the stars had wound its way through the horrors of the slave labor camps. Chapter 10: The Unsettling Verdict of History. Operation Paperclip eventually drew to a formal, bureaucratic close, but its deep structural legacy continues to reverberate through the institutions of the modern world. More than 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and intelligence operatives were successfully integrated into the fabric of American society. They received full citizenship, were granted prestigious chairs at major universities, took control of multi-billion-dollar corporate research programs, and were awarded some of the highest civilian honors the United States government can bestow. It was only in the final decades of the 20th century, following intense pressure from independent historians and the systematic deregulation of classified wartime archives, that the true, unvarnished scope of the program began to pierce the public consciousness. The revelation of the program's deep complicity caused a wave of profound discomfort. Arthur Rudolph, facing the sudden threat of a formal war crimes prosecution by the Department of Justice, quietly renounced his American citizenship in 1984 and fled the country. The true history of Dr. Hubertus Strughold was finally brought to light, resulting in his name being stripped from prestigious medical institutions and honors long after his death. But for the vast majority of the individuals recruited under Operation Paperclip, true legal retribution or moral accountability never arrived. They lived long, remarkably comfortable, and highly affluent lives, surrounded by loving families and honored by the institutions they helped to build. They passed away peacefully in their suburban beds, buried with full honors beneath manicured American lawns. The true history of Operation Paperclip leaves behind a bitter, deeply unsettling aftertaste. It forces us to confront a reality that is fundamentally cynical. The machinery of global geopolitics possesses no inherent conscience or moral compass. When confronted with a supreme existential struggle, the founding principles of democracy, human rights, and the preservation of justice for victims of mass atrocities were effortlessly cast aside in favor of raw technological superiority and military dominance. The powerful intelligence networks, medical disciplines, and technological structures that define the modern Western world were forged, in significant part, by hands that had willingly served the absolute depths of human evil. This historical reality dismantles the comforting myth of pure progress, forcing us to realize that the advanced civilization we enjoy today was built upon a foundation of deep, unpunished betrayal.